On March 5th, 2024, a visual artist named Anna Marie Tendler announced on Instagram that she would be publishing a memoir called Men Have Called Her Crazy. The comments quickly filled up with people saying things like, "Ruin him, queen." Imagine being him and getting the screenshots of this from his friends today. As a member of that other person's hate club, yes. The other person that they're talking about is Anna Marie Tendler's ex-husband, the comedian John Mulaney. But when the book came out, there was virtually nothing about her ex-husband in the book. Many reviewers and readers called the choice to exclude her famous ex-husband an artistic decision. They say, well, the book was a feminist piece of literature. Maybe she doesn't want to be defined by her ex-husband and the drama surrounding their separation. But I read the book and I knew the backstory, and here's my take. This was not a creative decision on the part of the author. This was a thorough NDA, and I believe that there is extensive evidence in the text that she was silenced, not silent, and I also believe that her omission of her marriage was unfortunately the book's fatal flaw, and the reason that people are calling this book 2014 Tumblr feminism. I'll get into that a bit more later on. First, to get us all caught up, here's the backstory. So John Mulaney, originally from Chicago, got his start as a writer on SNL in 2008. For example, he wrote the famous character Stefan along with Bill Hader.
And I'm taking my girlfriend. Boo!
But he really rose to prominence in 2012 with the popular comedy special New in Town, which shared relatable stories about his American Irish Catholic upbringing. He opened up about his sobriety, and he made a lot of self-deprecating jokes.
Now when people make fun of me, I deserve it.
Throughout his comedy specials, New in Town, The Comeback Kid, and Kid Gorgeous, he made a lot of jokes about his first girlfriend, then wife, Anna Marie Tendler.
My wife, my now wife, Anna. My wife, 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 my wife. That's my wife and my daughter. I love and respect my wife very much.
He talked about his relationship with Tendler and their dog Petunia with a lot of love, which cultivated a public image of Mulaney as this relatable, lovable gentleman. He also made a point in his comedy pretty often that he did not want kids, and he joked about the pressure and expectations to have children. He posted frequently on social media about how much he loved and admired his wife. His jokes kind of painted Tendler as really tough and difficult, and he always portrayed himself as this sort of passive, like, yes, honey, husband. In an episode of Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee, the whole joke with Jerry Seinfeld is that Mulaney is being like, forced against his will to buy carpets. And then there's this one famous joke about Tendler, for example, when Mulaney says that she told him before his comedy routine, just don't tell everyone that I'm a bitch and that you don't like me. But he says, I would never say that. My wife is a bitch and I like her very much. And he tells these stories about she doesn't care what other people think, and then for that, she is his hero. I think John Mulaney is very funny, although, and this will become relevant later, a lot of his humor is based around the relatability and likability of his character. I had a similar upbringing to him, so I look at John Mulaney, I see my cousins, I see the kids I grew up with. I'm reminded of kidding around with other friends in the back of class at Catholic school. His comedy almost gave me the sensation that I knew him, and so I was rooting for him, and I know that a lot of other fans also felt the same way. Okay, so it's gonna get very gossip call-y for a moment here, just bear with me. I promise it's related to the book. So in December 2020, after being confronted by a group of concerned friends in an intervention, John Mulaney went to rehab for alcoholism, cocaine addiction, and prescription drug abuse. About a month later, in January 2021, his wife, Anna Marie Tendler, also went into an inpatient program, not for substance abuse, but rather for depression, self-harm, and suicidal ideation. The book that I will be reviewing today starts with Tendler's admission into this rehabilitation facility. From the book, it seems like she spent about a month there. The tabloids reported that John Mulaney left rehab in the end of March 2021. Now, I do not know this story personally, but considering that it usually takes about 9 months for a healthy human baby to grow, we can assume that almost immediately after leaving rehab, John Mulaney conceived a baby. Not with his wife, Anna Marie Tendler, but with the famous actress, Olivia Munn. Now, at this point, the public does not know that yet. As far as the tabloids know, Mulaney and Tendler are still married and co-parenting their dog Petunia with no plans of having children. But 2 months later, in May of 2021, presumably after Mulaney finds out he's going to be a father to what us Irish Catholics like to call a 9-pound preemie, Mulaney and Tendler announced that after 7 years of a rather public marriage, they're getting a divorce. but instead of a spit-polished PR statement from the couple saying that it was mutual, the public gets a brief yet heart-wrenching statement from Anna Marie Tendler in which she says, "I am heartbroken that John has decided to end our marriage." In September 2021, 2 months before John Mulaney's firstborn came into the picture, he announced to the public that he was having a baby with Olivia Munn. On Late Night with Seth Meyers, John Mulaney said, "I went to rehab in September, okay? I got out in October." Anyways, here's the news that he went into a 60-day program in the end of December, and here's the news when he got out in the end of February, but yeah, October. Sure, John. I move out of my home for my ex-wife. Then in the spring, I went to Los Angeles and met and started to date a wonderful woman named Olivia. You may know her from the Lego Ninja movie and Zoolander 2. Sorry. I got into the relationship that's been really beautiful with someone incredible, and we're having a baby together. I remember being on social media at this time. People were really giving him a lot of grief about this. I have seen tweets recently, this is a side note, I've seen tweets recently where people have said something along the lines of, he was hated on for getting a divorce, and I'm like, are they paying you to say this? Like, when was it ever socially celebrated to have a kid with someone who isn't your wife? Munn would later admit it was a surprise pregnancy. Oh, God bless you. It was a surprise pregnancy. I did not have any doctor team ready. I had no idea. So the bundle of joy is born, and John Mulaney almost immediately starts sharing loving posts, photos, and videos of his new girlfriend and his son, Malcolm. They are now, at this point, 2024, married, and I think they have another child. John Mulaney got back into stand-up. He finally hit puberty, or maybe he got plastic surgery. I don't have any evidence of that except from what I can see with my eyes, but I don't know why we're gonna pretend who is this man? Who is this man? And if I could say one thing to John Mulaney about all of this, it would be, if you really care about being a family man and not just portraying a family man for the sake of your public image, then please get your baby's gorgeous, innocent faces off social media. They did not choose to be a part of this drama, and they certainly can't consent to being broadcasted to millions of followers, many of whom are diagnosably psychotic creeps who think they are your friends. Have you learned nothing? You called likability a prison, so why are you knocking down the door of the jail trying to get locked up again, this time with your babies? They didn't ask to go to jail. Okay, I wanted to say that early in the video, so back to the story. Meanwhile, Anna Marie Tendler is out of mental health rehabilitation, and she starts sharing harrowing photography self-portraits that depict her alone, pale, and crying in a large empty house. On Mother's Day, John Mulaney shares an image of him kissing Olivia Munn after giving birth to their son, and Tendler in turn shares a photo of her feeding their dog out of a bottle with a blindfold on. In her portraits, she looks unhealthy and emaciated, and you can see scars from self-harm. The images are artful, vulnerable, and powerful. She doesn't shy away from her pain or try to portray a prettied up false reality. In April 2022, the dog that Tendler and Mulaney had together passed away. They both posted on social media about how torn up they were feeling. She does go into detail about the passing of her dog in her book. And when John Mulaney went through this public fall from grace, as a fan, I was so disappointed. I'm just kidding. I don't know these people personally, so their life decisions have no emotional effect on me. But he had built his career around this image, his relationship, his marriage, this humble, nice guy. I'm just a skinny, dorky millennial type of vibe, and it's hard to maintain an image like that with a spurned ex-wife, a child out of wedlock, and expensive jawline implants. People accused him of being a wife guy, which is someone who uses the image of a kind, good man who loves his wife to improve his public image, while in private he mistreats, cheats on, or belittles his same wife. So Mulaney came out with a new comedy special in 2023 called Baby J. In Baby J, he opened up about the fact that he had been using essentially throughout his entire career, and he only got sober in 2020 when he went to rehab. He doesn't say much about his divorce or ex-wife, but he does talk about his new partner and baby. He actually, in recent years, has really leaned back into this wife guy image. Now, a lot of his comedy specials are about his new wife and his new baby, never really acknowledging the fact that this is a different wife than the one who he used to make jokes about. Personally, there were parts of Baby J that made me laugh really hard. I still think that he is a super funny person, but because he was this character who I really liked and who reminded me of my friends and family, seeing him talk about being in the pits of addiction was honestly just really sad. You can tell that he's embarrassed by his own actions, but he's talking about them for the sake of the special. And so like people are laughing, and I was watching it and I just kind of felt like, wow, that sounds pretty rough, man. Like, I'm glad you got some help. I don't know if any of you saw the comedy special that Chris Rock did after his divorce and after he got slapped at the Oscars. It was kind of a similar vibe. You can tell he's really not in a good place, not really processing the divorce well. Everyone is laughing and they're like, haha, he's lonely and questioning his value as a man. I love comedy. Both of those specials, I came away from them just feeling a little yucky. That said, John Mulaney is at a point in his career. He has the money, the fame, the lawyers, the PR. Anna Marie Tendler points this out in her memoir multiple times. Money is power. So he won an Emmy for the special. It had a huge audience. And again, Mulaney gets to share his side of the story. And it seemed like Anna Marie Tendler wouldn't get to share her side until she announced in March of this year that she has a book coming out about, quote, the endless source of my heartbreak and rage, men. And now you're all caught up. Okay, that's enough trashy celebrity gossip. Let's move on to my very intellectual book review. I'm just kidding. I followed the whole thing in real time. I'm super nosy, so I was eating it up. So Anna Marie Tendler's book came out, and people who had been following her public image mostly assumed that it would be a John Mulaney tell-all. The New York Times published a review before it came out called Anna Marie Tendler Knows You Think Her Book is About John Mulaney. So I'm going to summarize the book so that we're all on the same page. Trigger warnings: self-harm, suicide, and disordered eating. If you have already read the book or if you don't want spoilers, then skip ahead because I give my opinions in my review of the book later on. Specifically, I review the feminism in this book, which has really come under fire. So the book starts with Tendler checking into a rehab facility in New England due to suicide risk, and then the book alternates between odd-numbered chapters which detail her experience in rehab and even-numbered chapters which share stories from before rehab, starting with when she was a teenager living through her parents' divorce, when she first started to cut herself. The chapters from the past focus almost exclusively on her relationships with men, and the implication is that her problems and her rehab stay are because of those men and how they treated her. In the odd-numbered therapy chapters, Anna meets the young women who she is sharing a house with. She had specifically requested to be in a house with only women, but the only all-women house was for people with addictions. So she was staying in an addiction rehab house even though she wasn't there for an addiction problem. She makes a point to talk about the people who are wealthy, who are inside the same rehab facility but in a much nicer building, and they don't interact with them. It made me pause for a second and wonder if she was talking about her husband, because nothing ever really came of it after that. When other women in her facility share stories of their own addictions, Tendler internally has this visceral reaction where she's kind of in her internal monologue chastising these women. You're ruining your lives. You're ruining the lives of the people who you love. And she admits in the book that she is currently, at the time of writing, in support groups for the loved ones of people who are addicted to narcotics and alcohol. And while she implies that the person in her life who lived through addiction was her husband, she doesn't say that outright. Tendler's living situation is precarious at the time of writing the book. She shares that she was living in New York and has only recently moved to Connecticut, but doesn't know for how long she'll be there. She also references her husband and her marriage a few times in passing without revealing any details. For example, one of the women in rehab is an artist, and she lights up when Tendler shares that she is also an artist. But Tendler admits to the girl that despite being an artist full-time, she is still dependent on her husband's income. The closest we get to understanding why Tendler is in rehab is this confession she makes in a group therapy session. I've had a really bad year. My life feels like it's falling apart. Everything I thought I knew about my world is unraveling, and I feel powerless to stop it. I don't know how I'm ever going to feel better. Some days I feel utterly hopeless. My wish for myself is that one day I'll reach a place where I can face hardship, because I fear the worst is still to come, without trying to destroy myself. And girl, you know, the worst was yet to come, because her man was about to make a baby with Betsy Braddock. Tendler worries in the book that her life has been a series of stops and starts. She started a dance career, and then she quit due to an injury. She went to cosmetology school, but when she failed her certification exam, she never retook it. She dropped out of art school. She cut people's hair, then she quit. She became a makeup artist, then she quit. Throughout this time, she has been financially dependent on a series of romantic partners. She admits, I have never felt truly good at any of the things that I have started, so I abandoned them when the weight of mediocrity, or worse, inability becomes too overwhelming. In the even chapters that delve into Tendler's past, we learn that while Tendler is in her junior year of high school, she and her best friend start to get involved in the punk scene. At these shows, older band members take romantic interest in her. She seeks out these shows to get away from the house, where her mother experiences bouts of rage that cause her to scream at Anna for innocuous offenses. When the police find 16-year-old Anna and a 23-year-old punk musician in a car hooking up, he lies about her age and the police let them go, and then he ghosts her. The whole environment of the punk scene at this time, as Anna describes it, was very predatory. Her and her friends are constantly trying to ward off advances from older men, sometimes in their mid-40s. In therapy, Tendler makes bracelets and she meets a dog and she grows little plants and she goes to yoga. She talks a lot about her anger and resentment toward men and quickly becomes irritated in almost every interaction she has with other men in the facility, including the therapists. In another flashback, Anna tells the story of meeting Sam, a 28-year-old punk artist, when she was 17. Sam and Anna start dating and she loses her virginity to him. He is very kind to her at first. He doesn't pressure her, and he takes care of her. So Anna moves to LA to go to cosmetology school, but really to move in with Sam. Then there start to be these moments where he gets really upset with her, often for making little mistakes, like for example, leaving fruit to rot on top of the fridge because she forgot about it. Mistakes that any child would make. He chastises for them as if he forgets that he is dating a 17-year-old. Sam is often on tour, and he leaves Anna alone in his apartment, so she becomes isolated on the West Coast without internet access and away from her family and friends. Eventually, she goes home for a visit, leaving all of her stuff in Sam's apartment. While home, she gets the courage to call him and break up. He gets angry at her. She tries to get in touch with him a few more times and get her stuff back, but then he ghosts her, just stealing all of her things. Back in the therapy chapters, Anna tries to leave rehab, but at her outtake meeting, her therapist says she doesn't want to work with her anymore, and her therapist phrases it as, maybe it's time for us to get a divorce. And apparently Anna is going through a divorce at this time, even though she hasn't told us anything about it, so this comment causes her to have a nervous breakdown, and she extends her stay in rehab. So in the flashbacks after her breakup with the punk artists, Anna moves to New York, gets an apartment with her best friend, works at a hair salon, and she takes some college classes in art history. But then Amanda, who's Anna's best friend, starts working at a famous website. And at a party, Anna meets the CEO of said famous website, who she calls Theo. Users on Reddit have speculated that Theo is actually the founder of College Humor, Ricky Van Veen, and Theo has just sold his website and he's become a multi-millionaire in his mid-20s. While the other men Anna has dated up until this point have been what she calls alternative, effortlessly cool. Theo is dorky. She also says he's not funny, which is hilarious, by the way, that she chose to include that about the founder of College Humor. But there is a woman openly interested in Theo whose name is Rachel. Users on Reddit speculate that Rachel is Julia Allison, who is like an influencer or something. And Rachel tells Anna at a party that Theo doesn't want to date a hairdresser who lives in Queens. And Anna tells Theo about this, but he just laughs it off. Anna goes to parties at Theo's place in the Hamptons, and he encourages her to quit the salon and start cutting hair freelance so that he can tell people his girlfriend owns a business instead of telling people that she cuts hair. She cuts Rachel's hair and Rachel refuses to pay her, which Theo thinks is funny. Anna is irritated by everyone in the Hamptons. She calls them posers and she thinks they are deeply uncool. After more than a year together, when Anna tells Theo that she can't go to the Hamptons for another summer because she has to stay in the city and work, he says that he will pay her to clean his 6-bedroom mansion so that she can stay. She says she doesn't think it's a good idea. Theo takes Anna to Japan, and on their way back, she catches him reading an email from Rachel in which Rachel called Anna a gold digger, and she told Theo that Anna is using him. Then Rachel says, "Not me though, I pay for myself and I'm also chill and different." So Anna freaks out in the airport. She calls Theo a liar, she storms off, everyone in the airport is kind of watching the whole ordeal. And then Tendler writes, "Here is the thing about men lying to women while telling them they are crazy or overreacting. The lying, the underplaying on their side, makes us doubt our intuition and intelligence. So eventually, when suspicions are confirmed and we find out that we have been correct all along, we do go batshit fucking crazy, and it is warranted." The pair breaks up not long after. Anna becomes a makeup artist and she works on sets all day, so I guess that it's around this time that she met John Mulaney, but she doesn't tell us that. There is a story about a woman who mistreats Anna on set, and so she decides to just quit being a makeup artist. She starts making decorative lampshades, and it's around here that things start getting really vague. Stories that up until this point were deeply personal and revelatory are now surface level and random. Back in therapy, new women arrive. Some of the young women who Anna was close with end up leaving, and she's pretty bummed out about it. There's a story about everyone sneaking off in the middle of the night, and Anna wants to go, but she doesn't, and then they all get drug tested, and then they come back clean, and you keep thinking something is going to come of the story, but nothing does. So I have no idea why she stretched this out throughout multiple chapters. It's like she didn't have anything else to write about, so she was just like, and then some people I didn't know went on a walk. In 2013, Anna gets a puppy named Petunia. She writes about this dog with a lot of love. I assume that she got the puppy with John Mulaney just from photos that I've seen and from his stand-up, but he is still conspicuously missing from these chapters. She takes Petunia to a dog communicator, so as a reader, of course, I'm thinking, okay, so she has money now. If you follow celebrity gossip, then you know why. At this point, she's already married to a hyper-successful, famous comedian. But if you came to this book with a blank slate, you would be thinking, did I miss something? Because 2 chapters ago, she was washing hair in New York City for $8 the hour, and now she's quitting her job because it's boring and paying for someone to pretend to read her dog's mind. Like, is the decorative lampshade business more lucrative than I thought? Back to the therapy storyline, Anna decides to split with Dr. Carr, the therapist who said they needed a divorce. And Dr. Carr becomes like super evil again, and she accuses Anna of manipulating her male therapist at rehab. This therapist's sudden character change from like a long-term helpful contact to Anna to someone who seems to want to hurt her is never really explained, so I don't really know what to tell you, but it really bothers our narrator. So she goes home, she talks a little bit about her DBT support group, her foray into photography, and then the next time she goes into the past to talk about her backstory, all of a sudden she is post-divorce. She's dating a guy named Reese, and they're arguing because she said that she doesn't want to have sons. And he tells her that because of this comment, his female friends called her crazy, godless, and soulless. This comment struck me as kind of anti-Semitic. Like, of all the insults you could have chosen, why did you say soulless and godless? Like, why are you bringing God into this? Then, in response to this comment, Anna writes, I hate men. I hate them so much. Men are the cause of all my problems. Men are the cause of everyone's problems. They are stupid and they are arrogant. They think everything they say is true and right. I hate them so fucking much, I don't even know if I can fuck them anymore. Okay, so before this, we knew that Anna Marie Tendler hates men when she's in therapy. But while she's talking about her dating history, she didn't really take on that same perspective. This I hate men. Men are the cause of all my problems. This tune is new. It is post-divorce. Something happened to our narrator that changed her character. If you don't know that at this time, her ex-husband, who publicly claimed to never want children, is now sharing loving photos of the son he conceived with another woman while still married to Anna, then this sudden change is jarring and it comes across as an overreaction. Her whole stint in therapy seems random and inexplicable. As the reader at this point, I'm flipping back through the memoir to see if I accidentally skipped a chapter, but I didn't. She didn't talk about her husband, their courtship, their 7-year marriage, their messy divorce, none of it. So Anna and Reese break up. Anna, who at this point is 36 and divorced, she decides to freeze her eggs. It costs $12,000 and the process is long and grueling, but she was married to John Mulaney, who said he didn't want kids, so she might feel at this point like it's her last chance to freeze her eggs. So she tries. And in the end, they're able to harvest 8 eggs, and she's disappointed. She was hoping for more because often some of the eggs aren't viable or they don't take, so they recommend another round of IVF so they can get more eggs, but she decides to not do it. Getting towards the end, Anna is destroyed by a situationship with a man named Javier. Petunia, Anna's dog, gets sick and they will need to put her down, and there's a very special chapter during which Anna outlines how she walked Petunia to each room in her house and talked to her about the memories that they made in each room. And at the end of the book, Anna gets a summary of her rehab experience from her therapist, and she feels mischaracterized by them, so she kind of takes her book as a chance to disprove things that they said and set the record straight with them. She talks about how her mental health is now, and while she does celebrate her growth, she also is very honest about the fact that she's not healed. And she writes, I won't pretend that I'm miraculously happy now, that I never think about wanting to die. I do. I think that to write anything else, like anything that frames her situation now as if she's all better and she has all the answers, I think that it would have been disingenuous. So I liked this ending aside from the random vendetta against her therapists. Okay, we're going to get into my critique of Men Have Called Her Crazy. Reviewers' biggest criticism of this book has to do with the protagonist's life view. She hates men, that much is clear, and she also openly blames men for all of her problems, which means that she herself does not take responsibility or assume guilt for any errors that she commits in her life. This makes for a frustrating memoir, because memoirs, especially mental health memoirs, usually have the format of a character arc, and you don't change or mature as a character if you never own up to mistakes. Because why would you change if nothing was your fault in the first place? I'll go deeper into this criticism later. As a celebrity memoir, I want to say that overall it's pretty artistic, and I'm wondering actually if Jennette McCurdy sort of raised the bar for what people expect from celebrity memoirs, because usually celebrity memoirs are really, really bad. So according to that standard, this one was surprisingly good. But if this were just a book written by a full-time writer, I would be more critical of it and I would probably call it mediocre. That said, I know that Tendler isn't a writer, so I was actually surprised by her ability to write. Tendler is an artist, you can tell. You can also definitely tell that she is a visual artist because she's skilled when it comes to describing scenery, if at times I felt that she didn't so much want to explain the environment to the reader as show the reader how much she knows about interior design. In general, I think that she has a poetic way of viewing and describing the world. I want to give you a little bit of background on this book from a publishing perspective. Tendler shared in an interview that this book was originally going to be a book of photographs with snippets of memoir writing. Then an editor from Simon & Schuster named Sean Manning, who was also the editor for I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jennette McCurdy, convinced Tendler to write a full memoir, probably saying something along the lines of, if you write a memoir and we market it as a John Mulaney tell-all, then I can make a lot of money. I'm kidding, he probably said something artsy like, this feels like it wants to be a memoir, and she ate that shit up. This photography book feels like it wants to be a celebrity memoir that makes me a lot of money. With that context into the publishing process, I thought to myself, I wish she had done the book of photography, because her photography is great. I think it's better than her writing, and if she only had to include little autobiographical snippets, then she wouldn't have had to fluff up her book with things like, one time at rehab I saw turkeys. So this book had the same editor as I'm Glad My Mom Died, and it seemed like they were trying to replicate the success of Jennette McCurdy's memoir. A New York Times review before release compared Tendler's book to McCurdy's book, but I don't think that's a fair comparison. McCurdy's book was far superior to Tendler's. A more apt comparison would be saying, imagine the book I'm Glad My Mom Died, but if McCurdy wasn't allowed to talk about her mom. You would just be reading this book like, why is she so sad? I agree with the Washington Post's take that this book feels like it should have just been a therapy journal at times. But even as a therapy journal, it wasn't great either because she doesn't try that many different therapeutic techniques. If you liked the therapy parts, but you were left wanting more, I would sooner recommend What My Bones Know by Stephanie Fu. Fu, in her book, tries every type of therapy and therapeutic activity that someone with a decent amount of money in New York City can find, and she documents the whole process while also telling traumatic stories from her childhood. I didn't personally enjoy What My Bones Know. My opinion was that the author/narrator Stephanie Fu approached therapy with a lot of entitlement and classism. For example, if there was a therapist that was cheaper, then Fu would criticize their clothes, their interior design, and their appearance even, and then eventually ditch them even if they were helpful. And then when she goes to this exorbitantly expensive therapist, she's just immediately on board with him and in awe of him. But regardless of my criticisms of Stephanie Fu, there is no contesting that in this book she really demonstrated an iron will. She was ready to heal and she was willing to fight for it. So if you came away from Men Have Called Her Crazy feeling disappointed with the therapeutic options explored or not explored by Tendler, then you might enjoy What My Bones Know. Also, if you liked the parts that Tendler wrote about Petunia, I would recommend the book Dog Medicine, How My Dog Saved Me From Myself by Julie Barton, which is a really lovely little book about a woman who overcomes depression with her golden retriever. One more recommendation, if you are frustrated by Tendler's approach to feminism and victimhood in this book, I would check out The Cinderella Complex by Colette Dowling, which is not a memoir, nonfiction, but sometimes we make the mistake of thinking that our problems are unique and modern, but The Cinderella Complex was written in 1981, and I think that it would be a great read for Tendler today if she hasn't read it already. Now, earlier I touched on some theories as to why Tendler didn't mention her ex-husband, with many reviewers framing this as a feminist choice. Even her editor said in a New York Times interview, her identity has been very much limited and diminished by a perception of who she is. Now she's able to speak for herself and she's able to tell the story that she wants to tell. I really disagree that this was the story that she wanted to tell, and I also disagree that it was a feminist choice to omit her ex-husband's story. I believe that my theory that her hands were tied by an NDA is supported in the text. Here's my evidence that this was an NDA memoir. Okay, Exhibit A, Anna Marie Tendler holds grudges. Tendler's writing style is not subtle, which is fine, but there were points when I asked myself if she wrote this book just to settle scores. For example, when Reese called her godless for not wanting sons, she spent an entire chapter writing out their whole argument, painting herself as the one who won the argument. And as a reader, I was asking myself if this was relevant to the story itself, or if she just really, really, really wanted us to know that she was right. And I think it was the latter. In his comedy, John Mulaney portrayed this woman as super tough, like an MMA fighter, but the woman who I met in this memoir was instead passive to a fault. There were many circumstances where she did not stand up for herself and did not say how she felt in the moment, and then sometimes decades later sat down to write chapters and chapters about how she was right and they were wrong. And I know that writing out the words that you didn't say can be very cathartic, but now us as readers are subjected to reading about how right she was, and in reality the reader is a neutral third party. The reader typically doesn't really care who won in an argument between you and your therapist. Knowing what I know now about Anna Marie Tendler, I'm pretty sure that if she weren't silenced by an NDA, she would have used this book as a chance to air out everything that went unsaid during her divorce. Because I'm almost certain that there's more resentment involved in a divorce than against a beauty school professor who hit on her once in 2004. That brings me to Exhibit B. She wrote about everyone else. In the acknowledgments of her book, Tendler wrote a note to her friends and family. She said, "Everyone has their side of the story. This is mine." She needed to do that because she wrote about the worst moments of her mother, her brother, her father, her stepmother, her dog, her therapist, and she didn't write about her ex-husband because she wanted to make a feminist statement. Give me a break. It was an NDA. Okay, Exhibit C. She cares about the artistic integrity of her work. If there is one thing clear about Tendler from this book, it's that she is an artist. She's sensitive. She was born to be creative. And I can say, as someone who is also a writer, that it is not easy to write about your personal life and to potentially expose people who you love and care about to criticism. But if you care about the artistic integrity of your work, then you still do it, because you trust that your love and respect for that person will shine through in the words you write, and your work will thus become a love letter and not an expose. Tendler has said that she knew the #1 criticism of her book would be that she didn't talk about John Mulaney. If she knew that would be a major issue in her work of art, then I don't believe she would have left it out, unless she felt she had no choice, because of an NDA. And Exhibit D, she is financially dependent on him. Tendler is open in the book about her financial dependence on her husband. It is actually kind of shocking to read the book and find out that not only was she financially dependent on her husband, but she has essentially never had a job because there's always been a man who financially supported her. Given her financial stake in the game, there's a very high chance that Mulaney and his legal team could say, if you want alimony, you cannot write or speak publicly about this relationship, or even scarier, if you speak about our relationship, we will publicly assassinate your image, making it impossible for you to become a successful artist on your own accord. I'll speak about that second one a bit more later. Exhibit E, she loved an Atlantic review that called her book an NDA memoir. Of all the reviews of this book, the one that got Tendler the most excited, so excited that she dedicated a grid post to it, was a review from The Atlantic that said the book, quote, appears to have the uncanny shape of a 21st century art form, the NDA memoir. Just remember that even though John Mulaney has the public image of a sweet guy who wouldn't put his ex-wife in a legal headlock, just remember that the way that you and I experience John Mulaney is actually the result of millions of dollars of branding and PR and focus grouping. I love that tweet that says, is Popstar a feminist? Is MasterCard a queer ally? Is this TV show my friend? The reviews of this book on Goodreads are full of people speculating about whose fault this divorce really was. But asking if John Mulaney is a nice guy or a mean guy is like asking if Amazon is a nice guy or a mean guy. Amazon is a business. So is John Mulaney. And sure, in the case of celebrities, somewhere behind the layers of stage makeup and crusted spotlight sweat, there is a real person hidden in there, but that real person is a stranger to us. And addiction ain't cute. So I'd be willing to bet that John Mulaney and Olivia Munn are making some lawyers very rich right now to keep some truly heinous shit under wraps. I actually think that it would have been more of a feminist decision on Tendler's part to write about Mulaney and say, fuck your money, I'll say whatever I want, but I don't know her situation, and the public is very quick to villainize victims. So you can't blame her for wanting to avoid the public character assassination. But I feel a sense of kinship with all women and all artists, so it kind of sucks to see someone like that be silenced publicly and in real time. Okay, so again, Anna Marie Tendler hates men. She tried to walk back on that a little bit towards the end of the book with a note like, I don't hate men, I still want to fuck them. But that struck me as more of something that an editor maybe asked her to include. Really, the whole book is about how much she hates men because she sees them as the cause of all of her suffering and the cause of all of the world's suffering. So I'm going to argue against that philosophy, but with the following disclaimer in mind. Have you ever seen a rescue dog that's afraid of men? Maybe that dog is completely fine being surrounded by women, but as soon as a man enters the room, even if that dog has never interacted with that man before, all of a sudden it's barking and backing up and freaking out. You wouldn't, in that scenario, look at that dog and say, your philosophy is flawed, as I'm about to do with Anna Marie Tendler's book. You would very logically conclude, oh, the dog was abused by a man. So when people say, I hate men, men are trash, you usually look behind that thin curtain and you find someone who is exhibiting a trauma response. And that's what this book is. Anna Marie Tendler is saying she hates men and saying she doesn't want to have a son and saying that men cause all the world's problems because she is traumatized. Not because she is trying to promote a victim complex, or maybe she is. Again, this woman is a stranger to me. But that's why I want to be clear that I'm not attacking her so much as I am going after the philosophy of the book. Because this book has the philosophy and the message of a traumatized person who cannot talk about what traumatized her. As we established, it is highly likely that she signed a restrictive NDA. So instead of recognizing and understanding her philosophy in this book is what it is, which is a dark, destructive, displeasurable defense mechanism, the reader gets the impression that this philosophy is what she has decided to believe, sound of mind. And that's why the omission of her experience with John Mulaney was the fatal flaw of this book. Not because I wanted to know the gossip, but because trauma itself is illogical, unexpected, and horrifying. So it makes sense that the aftermath of trauma and the conclusions that you make about the world in response to trauma are also illogical. So without the story of what Anna was reacting to, we don't get the fact that her worldview at this time is a trauma response, and we just find what's left over, which is the flawed philosophy. It's like we stumbled upon a beach town wrecked by a hurricane, and looking at the branches and the buildings on the ground, we asked ourselves, why did they decide to build it like this? So let's engage with the I hate men philosophy as it appeared in this book, even though this book was murdered and dismembered by an NDA, because I have met many people who still live life with this I hate men philosophy. So even if it is often a trauma response, I still don't think we should dismiss it. When you say you hate all men, I would argue that you are engaging in gender essentialism. Gender essentialism is the idea that men are a certain way and women are a certain way. When people who are misogynistic engage with this belief, it's usually to justify sexist opinions. For example, a misogynist might say women are born to be caretakers, they are more loving, men are born to be protectors, they're stronger, they're just born that way. But interestingly, you also see a lot of self-proclaimed feminists engaging in gender essentialism just in a different way, saying things like all men are cheaters, men are trash, men are stupid, women are intuitive, women are smart, women are kind, women are trapped in a perpetually victimized dynamic because men are inherently victimizers and predators. When Anna Marie Tendler writes that she doesn't want to have sons, it is because she is, in this book, a gender essentialist. Her boyfriend at the time in the book told her you could raise your sons to be good men. The world needs good men. But Tendler counters, even if I raise them to be good men, it won't matter, because they'll be socialized by friends, teachers, the media, etc. to be a force of evil in the world. That's a paraphrase, but you get the idea. This is simply gender essentialism with a different timeline. Whereas a misogynist may believe that we are limited by our gender at birth, Tendler believes that we are limited by the gender that we are socialized to become. So we have this spectrum between people who think that we are born with a certain sex and that determines all gender expression. Born woman, pink, kitchen. Born man, blue. gun. Then on the other side, we have people who think that all gender is a performance, it's just socialized into you. These people would tell you that if a little girl wants to dress up as a princess, it's because she has already been socialized to think that she has to be pretty, spoiled, and saved, and not because there's something inherent in her that makes her more interested in princesses and her brother more interested in Transformers. Most people will tell you that how you express yourself in relation to your gender is probably a combination of nature and nurture. The fact that transgender people exist is evidence that we do not always become the stereotypes of the gender that we are socialized into. But I also don't think that we are born destined to either entirely body all the traits of our sex or be depressed. People find great joy in incorporating both traditionally masculine and traditionally feminine traits into their personality and habits, and I hope that many of us are fortunate to live in societies that are advanced and thus do not overtly punish people for either of those manifestations. I have issues with both sides of the gender essentialist spectrum. Of course, I have issues with misogyny, but because Tendler has written a book about how she hates men with a capital M, let's talk about that side. There are a lot of reasons why I don't like that life view, including the fact that it's a trauma response, my opinion that it's gender essentialism, and of course the reality that hate is a burden to bear that often hurts the person who feels that hatred more than the person they hate. But I particularly take issue with this philosophy when I see wealthy white women saying that they hate all men, and I couldn't figure out why that particular demographic saying this is annoying to me, and I thought about it a lot, and I realized that when you have an I hate men life view, it's hard for your feminism to also be intersectional, because if you see men as perpetual oppressors and women as perpetual victims, then you ignore a lot of other forms of oppression that can and do oppress men as well as women, up to and including the gender binary. So especially when wealthy white women have this worldview where they always see themselves as the oppressed party, it raises an eyebrow for me, because I think if you have a lot of money and fame and you're white, that means there are a lot of scenarios where you could be the one punching down. But if you always see yourself as the victim, then you may be blinded to the reality of a situation when you are the one doing the oppressing. Does that make sense? I've seen many examples of this in real life, and I'll speak about a few. And if you think that I'm mischaracterizing anyone I talk about, then I would love to hear that from you in the comments. Once I was chatting with an English student of mine in her mid-30s, and she told me, I hate all men because all men, even if they seem like good men, are part of a patriarchal system that oppresses women. This student was a white woman, so out of curiosity, I said, interesting, how do you feel about people who say, I hate all white people? And she was taken aback, and she said, that's not fair. And I said, but why not? By your logic, aren't all of us part of a racist system that oppresses anyone who isn't white? And she thought about it, and she said, well, not all of us have ancestors who were oppressors. But I feel that she had missed the point. I hadn't asked the question to make her feel guilty, but a history of racism is still noticeable in modern culture. There are still social hierarchies and subconscious biases that can lead to the oppression of certain cultural groups. But my student wasn't willing to recognize oppression when it benefited her because of her race, because her worldview only allowed her to see herself as oppressed due to her gender. And I understand. It's easy to criticize and lament the existence of systems of oppression and invisible hierarchies when you're the one being oppressed, but it's harder to admit when those systems benefit you. Many people live with this philosophy of, when things go badly for me, it's because there are unfair systems of the world that oppress me even though I don't deserve it. But when things go well for me, it can't be because those same systems also benefit me sometimes. It must be because of personal merit. There's a skit called New Terms from the Mexican sketch comedy group Backdoor, where we see a man who has come to repair the wall in a wealthy woman's house. When he tries to explain to her how he will fix the wall, she accuses him of mansplaining. He doesn't understand this foreign term, and he keeps unintentionally offending her. She says, you haven't heard of mansplaining? Where have you been all this time? And he says he's from Ecatepec, a municipality in Mexico with a lot of poverty. And she says, so you think that because you're from Ecatepec, that justifies your sexist behavior? And he says, no, I'm sorry, it's just that all these new terms are hard for me. And she says, oh, your life is so hard as a cisgender straight male? Don't talk to me about life being hard, okay? I'm a woman. And then the camera zooms out, and she's this tall, beautiful, well-dressed blonde standing in her mansion and literally speaking down to the short, darker-skinned laborer who she has hired to fix her house, and thus her hypocrisy is revealed. And I'm certain from having read this book that Anna Marie Tendler has spent much of her life in environments where she is the most oppressed person in the room. But of course that's because she has been surrounded with ridiculously wealthy celebrities. Compared to the rest of the world, she hasn't really dealt with oppression. But compared to the rest of the Hamptons, she was at the bottom of the totem pole, and that has clearly influenced her perspective. Social media is full of this hypocritical philosophy that claims that men are the source of all problems. Recently I saw a tweet where a woman shared a conversation with a person whom she has commanded through the app Instacart to buy her groceries and deliver them to her house. In the conversation, the Instacart shopper tells her that they are out of whipping cream, so he offers to bring her whipped cream instead. So she posts screenshots of their conversation, and she said, "Ban men from being Instacart shoppers immediately," and the tweet received 133,000 likes. Never mind that the Instacart shoppers' first language might not be English. Never mind that they stopped and asked to double check with you instead of just buying you something that you don't need. Never mind the level of luxury, wealth, comfort, and ease that you must live with to not even have to buy groceries because you can rent another person to do it for you. In reality, the woman who is mocking that Instacart driver was the one who is in a position of privilege in that scenario. But because she placed herself in the role of the more competent woman, forced to deal with a less competent man, she was validated for her perspective on social media. A great examination of this concept that I saw recently, and something that I really recommend reading, was Perul Segal's review in The New Yorker of the novel Liars by Sarah Manguso. The novel Liars follows a couple named Jane and John who are married and are now getting divorced. Jane, the protagonist, spends the whole novel complaining about how she has to do everything in her marriage. She gripes about her husband's incompetence, his laziness, his uselessness for hundreds of pages. Then when he leaves her for another woman, she gets on her knees and she begs him to stay. And if you were to ask Jane, this fictional character, about why her marriage came to an end, she would likely say, "I was victimized, I was cheated on, I was spurned." But the reviewer of this novel, Segal, very adeptly points out many instances in the book in which Jane put her husband down, criticized his grammar, and considered him beneath her. Still, Jane doesn't consider that she could have something to do with the dissolution of her own marriage. She doesn't consider that perhaps the blame is shared. Our protagonist is blind to that reality because she has already decided that she was a victim, and she locked in, and she found internet bubbles that would validate her helpless life view. The reviewer, Segal, reveals that this novel was actually essentially a lightly fictionalized memoir about the real-life divorce of the novel's author, Manguso, and the reviewer tells of another book, also written by Manguso, in which she wrote a chapter about mistreatment she suffered from a male doctor while ill. The reviewer, Segal, writes of this chapter, "In The Two Kinds of Decay, Manguso describes one of her doctors bungling a procedure, writing with rage and disgust about his clumsiness, his body odor. She never names him, but he provides the chapter heading, The Sheik. My breath catches every time I recall it, her easy, unembarrassed way of not only reducing this man to his identity, but having his identity announce the chapter, float over it, as if to explain his incompetence, his smell." But if a woman reduces her identity to being more intelligent and more intuitive than all men and yet confined to a victimized body in all scenarios, then she fails to see when she herself becomes the victimizer. She fails to see how she might be the one punching down if she includes an angry chapter in her book titled The Sheik and complains about a man's stench. If you ask the author about it, perhaps she would say that she was the one victimized in that scenario because she was a woman whose medical concerns weren't taken seriously by a male doctor, just as she was victimized by her husband when he left her after she spent an entire novel and perhaps an entire marriage complaining about how much smarter she is than him. Anna Marie Tendler is someone who has benefited immensely from patriarchy. Remember, this is the woman who has never had a job and has enjoyed a long absence of a career thanks to receiving financial support from her romantic partners, and her book has been highly criticized for this lack of self-awareness. Many of the reviews on Goodreads say things like, "I didn't trust the narrator who never felt genuinely self-reflective or responsible for anything." It's easy to blame all your problems on the patriarchy, on men, on sexism, but what's really hard is acknowledging that although systems of oppression exist, you still have the autonomy to control your own future. As much as she has endured bad treatment from men, the patriarchy society, also she has definitely financially benefited from a series of wealthier boyfriends who supported her art, grad school, etc. It doesn't seem like she's ever had a true job, and not to channel my inner Puritan, but she's almost 40, so maybe get a job. But after reading the book, While I do understand where these reviews are coming from, remember again that we are looking at the account of a woman who was radicalized by her trauma, but she wasn't allowed to write about the trauma that radicalized her. If she had written a book where she said, I was victimized by a patriarchal society when my multimillionaire celebrity husband used my image and his marriage with me to build up goodwill, then publicly humiliated me, then it would be easy for the reader to respond with, yes, you were probably the victim in that scenario, and I can see where your anger is coming from. But instead, the book reads as, I am a victim because one time my boyfriend Reese disagreed with me. So a lot of the readers understandably felt like she had a victim complex. Tendler finds herself in a frustrating position that many women, including myself, have found ourselves in. She's angry, but the people who really deserve to hear about her rage aren't the ones who listen to it. Tendler repeatedly does not stand up for herself or say how she really feels, so she ends up with a lot of bottled up rage. Sometimes we aren't even necessarily radicalized by something that happened to us personally. Sometimes it's just living in a society that victimizes women and doesn't take our pain seriously enough. That can be enough to fill you with anger. It is very natural to become angry because of heinous acts committed against women. I too feel so angry sometimes about the things that have happened to me, things I saw, the ways that women can be hurt and killed, and how often those who hurt them get away with it. But oftentimes in the brief moment you had to fight back against that specific person, that specific scenario, maybe you froze or you couldn't think of something to say or caught you off guard or you were just a kid. And so you end up with so much anger and hurt stuck inside you. But we can't sit down with the patriarchy in a room and explain our gripes. So sometimes we take out those big emotions on our partners or social media or just with men as a concept, and they don't always deserve it. Maybe sometimes healing your trauma just means giving yourself permission to not be angry anymore. Here is a Goodreads review from a British person, and I disagree with a big portion of it, which I'll explain after reading it. Quote, profoundly unlikable, discovering that she has got to 37 and has never had an actual job, rather just always managed to date rich men who will fund her lifestyle, genuinely almost made me fall off my chair. When the book was announced, I found it frustrating that she was only being referenced in the context of a man who had been in her life, but after reading it, it turns out that's really all there is to her story. A lot of her anxiety stems from feeling like she hasn't accomplished anything, and honestly, I don't know how to say this nicely, she hasn't. Yes, the patriarchy is real, but that doesn't mean you have to place so much of your self-worth in men. I learned this when I was 16. The book is not about the institutional misogyny that women face, especially in the medical world where a lot of this book takes place. Instead, it is a laundry list of her ex-boyfriends, which makes the SNL-sized absence even more noticeable and embarrassing. Plus, and this is mean, the whole review is mean. Just to be clear, I don't know why she put that parenthetical before this last part. It's hard to take complaints about heartbreak seriously when rich people say it. Imagine dealing with heartbreak and needing to go to work every day. Now listen, being a human is hard, right? We're chimpanzees who grew a frontal cortex so we could walk really far and plant seeds and take care of infants, and now we're aware of our own death, and in the blink of an eye, we've been thrust into a world with shit like 9-to-5s and Cybertrucks and porn addictions and substance abuse and the constant addictive live stream of the worst things you've ever seen mixed with stupid opinions, and you wake up in the middle of the night with questions like, why am I here? What is the point of all this? How can I undo my wrongs? And you will have to answer those questions, regardless of whether or not you are wealthy and famous. So that's why I don't really like this response of, you shouldn't be sad, I should be sad. Because it's like, we should all be sad. No, I'm just kidding. I don't believe that. I should phrase it this way. We all have excuses to be sad if we so choose to take them. So then the question becomes less, who really deserves to be sad? And more, who has had the maturity to develop a philosophy of resilience and gratitude, even in the face of having very real reasons to be sad? Because that might be the type of person I want to learn from. And the British reviewer is making some sense. I mean, when you're broke, you have to worry about all those questions I mentioned above, and on top of that, worry about how you're going to pay the bills. But to be fair, Anna Marie Tendler also has dealt with things that many of us not rich and famous people have never had to deal with. The reviewer urges us to imagine having your heart broken and then having to wake up and go to work the next day, and in response I would ask her to imagine having the worst moments of her life commented on and speculated about by millions of strangers. Not having to worry about that is a privilege of not being famous. I thought that this review was quite fair, and they have a really good vocabulary, so snaps for that. The back half of the book sees the bottom fall out of it. In what I'm sure is meant to be a powerful act of omission, the book exists in a liminal space of elision. Tendler recounts bad experiences with 2 boyfriends, and a decade vanishes. There is a very obvious lacuna haunting the text. The hatred of men extends beyond the 2020s memification of gender essentialism and reveals something much darker lurking underneath. And I believe that the darkness that this reviewer is referring to is a genuine hatred of men. And they continue, but even that becomes couched in the untouchable social justice language we're all deeply familiar with as denizens of the internet, common enough to become meaningless. Is your life predetermined because of your gender, because of your bad parents, because of your astrology? Too long didn't read. This feels like half a book. It's well written and powerful and sad and good, but there's very clearly a point when the story ran out and we got filler for 100 pages because Tendler refuses to contend with a lot of her own internal stuff, which feels odd for a mental illness memoir. I would add that I think we got a lot of that filler because of the NDA as well. So I'm going to wrap this up, but there's one more thing that I wanted to include. Anna Marie Tendler succeeded in this book in showing us that she is a very kind person. She takes care of the other girls in her inpatient rehabilitation. She loves her friends and constantly considers their feelings and experiences. She believes that the people she loves will heal from what ails them, and she herself also wants to let go of the pain that has so plagued her. I've spent a lot of this review pointing out the holes in the philosophy of this book. But in truth, I went into this story expecting what her ex-husband described as, quote, a 5-foot dynamite Jewish bitch. And instead, I found a sensitive woman in an immense amount of pain. If Anna Marie Tendler were my friend and I read this book, I would tell her, in order to truly love yourself, you may need to learn how to forgive the world that made you as you are. Your art has something in it that is very genuine and vulnerable, which makes it cool. And these nerds that you dated and spent your whole life emulating will try to buy that coolness their whole lives, and they will never succeed because, unlike you, they don't have the courage to say something that is true. They're too afraid to be human. They're too afraid to not be liked, even if it's just for a second. I included a review earlier that said that Anna has not achieved anything in her life, but that's not true because, among other things, she finished this book. She put herself out there in this book and in other mediums of art as well, and in doing so, she gave us something to discuss. She got the conversation going, so I'm grateful to her for that. If you disagree with anything I said, I get stuff wrong all the time, please tell me about it in a comment. And wow, you made it to the end of this monster review, thank you. You should subscribe. Also, I'll put a link to my website, which has a sign up for a newsletter. I send out videos, essays, opinions, thinking about sending fiction, we'll see. I send them out every month, personal essays, all that kind of stuff. So sign up for my newsletter. I don't spam, I don't have any ads. I just talk about stuff. Okay, thank you, bye.